Welcome back everyone, my name is Dustin. In our last video, we created our new logger project and logger class. Go over that real quick. So see, we have our new log, it's logging, we have warnings, info, and for today we're actually going to create the new texture class and TextureLoader. So first thing we're going to do is add the logger to the rendering project because that's where our texture and TextureLoader is going to be. So if you like, you can go through and change anywhere that we need to log a message or an error to use the new logger. So let's do that right now. So in our rendering project, so let's just go add new reference, and we're going to be adding the logger. Okay, and then also here, go to your properties and VC directories, and we'll add another include directory, and that's going to be the logger. Here, change this to solution dir. Okay, cool. And now we should have our logger there. Go into our rendering, and we'll just change some things just to make sure we have it. You see how this is an error basically, so we have an invalid index. So let's just put this in here. So include logger. And we can just come here, and we call that Scion error. And we can now just change it to this here. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. And then get rid of this. And just go uniform name. We can do that instead now, which is that's what we want to do. We'll just build it real fast, make sure everything builds. Great. So no issues there. So first thing we want to do for our texture class is actually create the texture class. So go to your essentials folder, new item. Texture.h. And then we're going to need to include a few things. We need to include glad. And we need to include string. And we're going to put this in the namespace of Scion rendering. First thing we're going to have is a public enum class for the texture type. Pixel, blended, none. We'll be extending this later on to include like a picking texture or a frame buffer texture, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Alright, so now we have that, and then we have some private variables we have to add, and that's just going to be the texture ID, so GLUint and texture ID. Then we need the width and the height, so int m width m height. And then we're going to also want to have the path. We want to keep the path in the texture, so if it has to reload later, way later on, we're going to have something that checks to see if the texture file actually has been modified, and then that will reload the texture. We're not near that yet, but that's just to let you know. So holding on to the path does matter for us. And then we have to have its type, so texture type, and we'll call that ME type. Cool. And let's do our public. Our public will have our constructor. And it'll just be texture. We'll have a default. And then we'll have texture. And that'll take in the ID. The width. The height. The texture type. And the type will just default to pixel, texture type, pixel, and the path. And we'll have that default to just an empty path for now. And our constructor, or destructor, sorry, will just be a default. So we need to create some getters for the width, height, and the texture ID. We do not need to create setters because we want to do that only in the TextureLoader. So we'll go inline, const, get width, const, return m width, and height. Oops, this needs to have int, sorry, and then inline const gluint get ID, const return m texture ID. Cool. We now need to create the bind and unbind functions to bind textures to OpenGL. So that will be void bind and void unbind. Cool. And let's get all these. All right, those should have been created for us. Let's go to texture.cpp and just change this real quick. All right, so for the default, we're just going to put it in as texture. This will call the other constructor 000 texture type none. And then this one is just going to be m texture ID, and that would be ID, m width, taking the width, m height, takes in the height, me type will be the type, and ms path will be the texture path. Whoops. And the bind function is pretty straightforward. We just want to go to GL bind texture, and that's the Texture2D, GL texture 2D, and that'll be our texture ID. And then GL bind texture. Oh, we just want to do the same thing, but then just bind it to 0 for unbinding. Cool, that's it. And that's really it for our texture class. The texture class itself is really just a holder of information for us to use. The TextureLoader will do all the loading for us. So now we'll move on to the TextureLoader that will handle the loading of this texture. So same place, we want to go essentials, add new header file, TextureLoader.h. All right, so in our TextureLoader.h, we need to include texture. And we also need to include memory. We need memory because we're going to be setting back in our create function, we're going to be creating a shared pointer. So namespace Scion rendering. You can name this whatever you like, and it would be class texture loader and private. So we're going to have some various private functions for loading specific texture types. Currently we only care about the pixel and blended types. Later on we'll be looking into the frame buffer textures and others, but we'll have to cross that bridge when we get there. I said that before. So but for now we'll just have the static load texture. And this will be a const std string reference file path, and then GLUint ID int. We can take a reference for the width, and int reference for the height. We want to be able to change these inside the function. So and bool blended equals false, and this should be bool as well. I guess it doesn't need to be bool, but that's okay. And then in public, we're just going to set our TextureLoader constructor to delete, because we don't need an instance of the TextureLoader. We just need the static functionality. So then we'll go static std shared pointer of a texture, create texture type, and then it'll take in the texture file path. All right, and that's all we need for now. And let's make those. So in TextureLoader.cpp, let's get rid of this again. If anybody knows a faster way so it does the namespace like this, please let me know. If not, it's all right. I'll just keep doing it this way. Okay. All right, so the load texture functionality will basically be the same as the one we're using in editor main.cpp file. So let's go there now and grab that. So main, right here. So basically this load texture is the exact same thing. So we want to take all of this and we'll just copy it for now. Go to our TextureLoader and just paste it in. Anything that needs to be fixed, so we need soil. We need C out, but we'll change this right now to our new logger. So let's go include soil.h, and we'll include our new logger. Logger.h. Cool. And right here, let's change this to our error. So Scion error. And we also want the Scion error here. Cool. So we go, and that's file path and soil last result. Get rid of that. Cool. That should work. Any other problems? Nope. So we'll just leave that just like that. That should work for us. Okay, so now in our create function, we're going to need to use a switch case that will be based on the type of texture that we want to create. First, let's create some variables. And we'll need GLUint, and that'll just be the ID. And then we need int width and height. And the first thing we want to do now is actually generate the texture ID and bind the new texture. So GL gen texture, and we want to do 1, and we want to bind it to the new ID that we created. And then we want to go GL bind texture, GL Texture2D to our new ID. The switch statement will call the correct load function based on the texture type that we have. So we'll just go switch type and case texture type, and pixel will be the first one, and blended, and then we'll have right here will be a default. In our default, we're just going to assert for now, and we'll assert false. And we'll just say the current type is not defined. Please use a defined texture type. Cool. And this will just return null pointer. All right, and this will be blended for now. Break. Break. We also need to have some to-do here. So we'll just do to-do, add other texture types for loading as needed. And an example will be the frame buffer. Cool. So here for pixel, we're going to have our load texture. Load texture. And I'll just take in our texture path. And I'll take in our ID, width, height, and then false, because it's not blended. Copy, and blended is true here. That's it. That's for those two. Let's make sure that's what we want. Yeah, so blended, if not blended, we're doing GL nearest. If blended, we're doing GL linear. That'll help blend the pixels together. Okay, so that should load the texture for us, set our ID, set our width, and for the return, we just want to return a new shared pointer for the texture. We could put a check in here to make sure that it does make the pointer without an issue, and if not, we could log an error, but this should be good for now. Feel free to add it in as you see fit. So we'll just go std, make shared, that's our texture, and that takes in the ID, the width, the height, and the texture path. Cool. Now let's do a quick build of the render. And build, see if that works. Failed. Why? Why did we fail here? Whoops. So it says cannot convert argument 4 from const to texture type. Oh yeah. Type. I forgot to do that. That should work now. Build. Awesome. Build succeeded. So now that that works, let's take all that stuff out of the main.cpp in our editor and see if we can get it. So right now, first thing we want to do, let's go to the top and add in our texture loader. Cool, texture loader, and everything texture related we want to remove. So let's remove this. So that's gone, and that will give us an error here. That's what we want. And we can just get rid of this. And actually we can get rid of all this texture stuff here. Get rid of that. So we'll add our temp texture here, temp texture, and we can just go auto texture is equal to now the Scion rendering texture loader create, and we're creating a texture type, and it's going to be pixel, and the path is, I believe the path is assets. Yeah, we can do that. Actually, let's just do it this way. Assets, textures, and castle.png. Let me just verify that. So here in the editor, assets, textures, castle.png. That should work. Okay, and then we'll just do a little check here. See if the texture is not null pointer. failed to create the texture. Now we'll just return -1 right here, because this should be a shared pointer of a texture. And if not, anywhere where we were using those values from before, like the width and height, we need to change that to texture. Texture get width and texture get height. Same way here. This should still work because we're using capture by reference, so anything that we make outside is capturing in this particular situation. And what else? It looks like we have another error, or is that a breakpoint? That is not an error. It's just telling me that. Let's go down here. This is an error. Yes. So now we need the texture get ID. All right, and now this should work. So let's just try to run it. Yay, so we're loading our texture using our TextureLoader and everything in there. So that works for us. We got our logger, TextureLoader, TextureLoader. We removed all the other stuff from the class. Awesome. All right, so that's the texture class and the TextureLoader. In the next video, we'll be taking out the camera class and putting that into our renderer. So that will be going into the core. If you want, as a little exercise, do that yourself. So take the camera class out and make its own class in the Scion rendering and under the core, and maybe give it some functionality and try it out yourself. And we'll go over that in the next video. Thanks for watching. Take it easy.